Hello, church family. Welcome to today's Sunday school lesson. We are in session 9 entitled Called. And our key idea this week is though Gideon considered himself inadequate, God called him to deliver his people from the Midianites. And we're in Judges chapter 6, verses 1 through 4, and then 7 through 16. We're going to start off by asking the question, when have you felt inadequate for a task, and where did you turn for help? So we often are guilty of comparing ourselves to others. I compare myself to other music ministers. Grace compares herself to other teachers and counselors and other mothers. We have a natural tendency as humans to compare. We want to compare ourselves for our own good. We want to, lift ourselves up, give ourselves a little bit of an ego boost. I'm not saying that's right nor wrong. I would say it's probably more on the wrong side. But also, um, Satan uses comparisons to discourage us. That if we are not as good at, say, a guitar player, in my case, as a friend or as someone else, that's a way that Satan can, instead of pushing us to better ourselves, push us rather to stop trying, push us to no longer be effective in something. And so it leads to discouragement because we believe others are better than us. It is especially confounding when God calls a person to serve him in some capacity when someone else seems better to do so. Moses had this kind of hesitation back when God called him to lead Israel out of Egypt. We're going to see that today with Gideon. Gideon was not a large man. Gideon was not a strong man per se. And so God calls Gideon to do this because it shows God's strength through Gideon's weakness and his lack of fit rather than his absolute sure fit. One thing that's really interesting, and we'll see this in the coming weeks, is that Gideon was supposed to deliver Israel from the Midianites, but he originally was going to have 32,000 soldiers. And then God reduced that number from 32,000 to only 300 to show without a shadow of a doubt that God was present with Israel and was the one delivering them from their oppression by the Midianites. So let's begin reading just a little bit of text before we do. Judges 6 indicates that once again the Israelites abandoned the Lord. So the whole book of Judges, like I talked about a couple weeks ago, or last week rather, is that Israel enters this pattern of faithfulness to God, unfaithfulness to God, a time of oppression, and then a time of deliverance where God rescues them from that oppression because of their disobedience. And then that cycle starts over again. And so the Lord raised up the Midianites and the Amalekites and the Kedemites to oppress Israel for 7 years. And so the Israelites were thrown into poverty and cried out to the Lord. And so he sent them a prophet to remind them of how he saved them out of Egypt, gave them the land of Canaan, and how they responded to him with disobedience. And then the Lord called Gideon to bring them out of this oppression by the Midianites. Gideon's account is the largest section of the book of Judges. And so let's begin reading there in verse 1. The Israelites did what was evil in the sight of the Lord, so the Lord handed them over to Midian for 7 years, and they oppressed Israel. Because of Midian, the Israelites made hiding places for themselves in the mountains, caves, and strongholds. Whenever the Israelites planted crops, the Midianites, Amalekites, and the people of the east came and attacked them. They encamped against them and destroyed the produce of the land even as far as Gaza. They left nothing for Israel to eat, as well as no sheep, ox, or donkey. When the Israelites cried out to him because of Midian, the Lord sent a prophet to them. He said to them, "This is what the Lord God of Israel says. I brought you out of Egypt and out of the place of slavery. I rescued you from the power of Egypt and the power of all who oppressed you. I drove them out before you and gave you their land. I said to you, I am the Lord your God. Do not fear the God of the Amorites, whose land you live in, but you did not obey me." The angel of the Lord came, and he sat under the oak that was in Ophrah, which belonged to Joash the Abiezrite. His son Gideon was threshing wheat in the winepress in order to hide it from the Midianites. When the angel of the Lord appeared to him and said, "The Lord is with you, valiant warrior," Gideon said to him, "Please, my Lord, if the Lord is with us, why has all this happened? And where are all his wonders that our ancestors told us about?" They said, "Hasn't the Lord brought us out of Egypt? But now the Lord has abandoned us and handed us over to Midian." The Lord turned to him and said, "Go in the strength you have and deliver Israel from the grasp of Midian. I am sending you." He said to him, "Please, Lord, how can I deliver Israel? Look, my family is the weakest in Manasseh, and I am the youngest in my father's family. But I will be with you," the Lord said to him. "You will strike Midian down as if it were one man." So, um, we see this pattern emerge again, that the Israelites did what was evil in the sight of the Lord, so he allowed them to be conquered by their enemies, and then he sends them a prophet to tell them that they had done wrong, and then he delivers them, or sends a deliverer in the shape of Gideon. We'll actually read that account next week, but we have this cycle once again appearing, and we're going to see this several more times throughout the book of Judges. So let's begin in our first section, which is called oppression. This is it looks like it's the whole chapter. No, it's not. It is verses 1 through 4 and then 7 through 10. The Israelites did what was evil in the sight of the Lord. So several judges, actually 3 judges, had already been, I believe it was 3. No, chapter 3 has the first 3 judges. Chapter 4, there were a couple of more judges. So we've had several judges at this point. There's been a couple of maybe generations. There's several years now that have happened to get to Judges chapter 6. But Israel was not unknown to this pattern. They were not unaware of it. They knew that this was the pattern, kind of what was going on. And so they did what was evil in the sight of the Lord. And several judges had already served across Israel, yet the nation generally continued to embrace idolatry and this cycle of sin. So the Lord handed them over to Midian for 7 years, and they oppressed Israel. And Israel's suffering mirrors what Moses described in Deuteronomy, that this would happen if you disobeyed the Lord. Because of Midian, the Israelites made hiding places for themselves in the mountains, caves, and strongholds. They were not just deprived, they were also fearful. They were fearful of the Midianites, and they were hiding from them. They were forced out of their homes and into the hills for shelter. Whenever the Israelites planted crops, the Midianites, Amalekites, and the people of the east, which would have been a nomadic tribe from the Arabian desert, they joined forces to destroy and to steal what Israel would try to grow. They encamped against them and destroyed the produce of the land, even as far as Gaza. They left nothing for Israel to eat, as well as no sheep, ox, or donkey. When the Israelites cried out to God because of Midian, the Lord sent a prophet to them. He said, "This is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says: I brought you out of Egypt and out of the place of slavery." So this prophet normally always came before the judge. That the prophet would come and say this kind of thing, like remind them of what God had done for Israel in the past. Prophets were empowered to share the Lord's message. This was another message of chastisement for ignoring God. And it was to remind them, hey, I said that you would be my people and I would be your God, but only so far as you were faithful to me, and you haven't been faithful to me. So that's why I have delivered you into the hands of the Midianites. So this prophet came and said, "I brought you out of the power of Egypt and out of the place of slavery. I rescued you from the power of Egypt and the power of all who oppressed you. I drove them out before you and gave you their land. I said to you, I am the Lord your God. Do not fear the gods of the Amorites whose land you live in. But you, Israel, did not obey me." So do you think, just a personal question here, do you think God's judgment through the Midianites was too harsh? Well, it was harsh. It was loss of home, loss of security, loss of food, forced into impoverishment, into poverty. And so I would say yes, it is a strong punishment, a strong chastisement, but you have to understand that this is not the first time. This was not the first chastisement of the Lord. This was several, maybe even a couple of generations after we read that Joshua had passed away, and that generation had gotten punished. We don't know exactly how long this was after Joshua, but many years have passed at this point. And so we see now that they are not doing well. They are not doing what the Lord has asked. And so when they are in this state, God uses big punishments to wake them up to what they are doing. What outcome should we anticipate if we live in disobedience to God? I think we should expect bad consequences, just like a child who disobeys their parents ought to expect consequences of their actions. We, as children of the Lord, we ought to also expect some kind of discipline and some kind of consequence for disobedience to the Lord. That could be loss of money. That could be loss of protection from sickness or financial ruin or what have you, but God does not bless disobedience. He always blesses obedience, but that the way he doesn't bless disobedience is often removing his hand of protection, as we've talked about many times. Which brings us to our second section, commission. And this is the commission of Gideon as the judge over Israel. The angel of the Lord, which is a special messenger from God. Some people say that this was a pre-incarnate appearance of Jesus. We don't know that for sure. It just says an angel of the Lord came, and he sat under the oak that was in Ophrah, which belonged to Joash the Abiezrite. I don't know how to say that. I'm not Brother Richard. His son Gideon was threshing wheat in the winepress in order to hide it from the Midianites. Then the angel of the Lord appeared to him and said, "The Lord is with you, valiant warrior." Now, this was a young man who was threshing wheat, who was, beating the chaff or the husk off of the wheat berries, but he was doing it in the winepress in order to hide it from the Midianites. He calls him a valiant warrior, and Gideon said, "Please, my Lord, if the Lord is with us, then why has all this happened? And where are all his wonders that our ancestors told us about? They said, 'Hasn't the Lord brought us out of Egypt?' But now the Lord has abandoned us and handed us over to Midian." The Lord turned to him and said, "Go in the strength you have and deliver Israel from the grasp of Midian. I am sending you." And so he gets this call, this commission, Gideon does, and number one, he kind of responds in disbelief to this. He says, "Where have you been, God? Like, what do you mean? And, where have all these wondrous signs been that our ancestors told us about?" Remember, Gideon, he's an Israelite. He's from the house of Manasseh, but the tribe of Manasseh, rather, but he hasn't seen the pillar of smoke and the pillar of fire that guided Israel through the wilderness. He wasn't there when Joshua and Caleb conquered Jericho and saw the walls come crumbling down. He didn't see any of that. And so his faith was quite weak. But we will see that he responds well. But the Lord says first, "I am sending you." So when we hear these kinds of calls, how do we typically respond to God in these calls in our life? Do we accept them? For one, I am a minister today because God called me into vocational ministry when I was 18 years old and had just graduated from high school. I heard the call very clearly on my life. I felt it very strongly from the Spirit. And the only thing I could say was echoing the words of Isaiah the prophet, here I am, Lord, send me." That's the call, is who's going to go, and our response ought to be, "Here I am, Lord, send me." We can often be hesitant to do that, reluctant to do that. So how might our circumstances impact our response to God's calling? If we're in a place where we are comfortable It is very hard to allow the calling to impact our lives to call us out of comfort and into discomfort. But that is often the case where a family is called into missions. A family is called away from the United States and into another country, or away from another country, even into the United States. I was talking to folks at preteen camp a couple of weeks ago, and they actually encountered I believe, a Zambian missionary who came from Zambia to the United States in order to share the gospel in the United States, one of the most evangelical missionary sending countries in the world. And they, in the nation of Zambia, or a church in Zambia, sent him to come to America, all the way from Africa. I believe West Africa is where Zambia is located. I'm going to just look it up on a map real quick. Get my... No, actually, Zambia is Central Africa. It is very Central Africa. Anyway, that's crazy to me that we actually have missionaries from other countries coming to America to share the gospel here, because that is a thing that God calls other Christians in other countries to do, to go and make disciples in all nations, not just their nation. And so we see we see Gideon's response here in verse 15. This is the reassurance that also God gives to Gideon. And our verses say they overlap a little bit. I'm just going to read verses 15 and 16. He said to him, Gideon said to the Lord, or to the Lord's angel, "Please, Lord, how can I deliver Israel? Look, my family is weakest in Manasseh, and I am the youngest in my family." Gideon had, just like I said Moses did, Gideon had plenty of excuses for not leading God's people, but the Lord assured him that he would not fight alone. But I am the youngest in my father's family, but I will be with you, the Lord said to him, and you will strike Midian down as if it were one man. So Gideon responds with an excuse, but God immediately responds with assurance, and assurance that not only will Gideon strike down Midian, but he's going to do it as if Midian were just one man and not a whole nother country, a whole nother nation and army. So how does the assurance of God's presence negate our excuse of inadequacy? Because God is more than adequate for every situation that the world could ever throw, or that the devil could ever throw. And his presence alone guarantees victory. It guaranteed victory for Moses. It guaranteed victory for David. It guaranteed victory for Joshua at Jericho. God's presence alone is enough for anything that we go through, whether it be earthly struggles like loss of a job, loss of financial stability, loss of a loved one or a spouse, or even as far as going through a divorce, that God can be supernaturally bigger than all of those things and get us through them in all things, in all situations. God can get us through. We just have to rely on him. So I hope that's an encouragement to you, that even through your trials, even through your hardest times, that the Lord has promised to be with you through all of them, especially if you are faithful to him. Thank you for being with me today. I look forward to worshiping with you very soon. Bye-bye.